You don't break a 20-year record by accident, General Marcus Hale said, his voice carrying across the training range like a quiet challenge. So whatever that call sign means, it won't mean anything here. A few soldiers chuckled under their breath, boots shifting in the dry gravel as the late afternoon sun stretched long shadows across the 600-yard line. The woman he was looking at didn't react. Evelyn Carter stood still, almost too still, her posture relaxed but precise in a way that didn't match the casual civilian jacket she wore. A faded patch rested near her shoulder, barely noticeable unless someone knew what to look for. Most didn't. Hale certainly didn't. He glanced down at the registration screen again, reading the call sign aloud with a faint smirk, as if testing it for weight. Phantom 7, he repeated, then shook his head. Sounds like something out of a movie. More quiet laughter followed. Evelyn's eyes didn't move toward him. They were fixed downrange, past the targets, past the markers, as if measuring something no one else could see. Wind brushed lightly from the west, just enough to stir dust along the firing lane. A flag near the control booth fluttered once, then settled. She noticed. Of course she did. Her fingers moved over the rifle laid out in front of her, not checking it the way trainees were taught, not going through the standard motions. Instead, she paused at odd points, adjusting things that didn't seem to need adjusting, aligning angles that most shooters wouldn't even consider. One of the younger soldiers leaned toward his friend and whispered, "She's overthinking it." The friend nodded, but his voice dropped lower than before. "Or she's done this before." Hale stepped closer, arms folded, watching with the detached confidence of someone who had set the standard everyone else was still chasing. His record had stood for 2 decades. No one had come within 10% of it. Not even his best instructors. He had seen every kind of shooter step onto this range. Fast ones, confident ones, lucky ones. They all missed something. They always did. Evelyn finally picked up the rifle. No rush. No hesitation. The metal gave a soft, familiar click as it settled into her shoulder. Her breathing slowed, not forced, not exaggerated. Just steady, like it had already been steady long before anyone started watching. The technician inside the control booth tapped a few keys, pulling up her profile. For a second, the screen flickered. He frowned, leaned closer, then tapped again. "That's weird," he muttered under his breath. The system hesitated, as if searching through something old, something buried. A faint line of text appeared, then disappeared too quickly for him to read. He straightened, uneasy, but said nothing. Out on the range, the air seemed to thin. Conversations faded. Even the quiet jokes stopped. There was something about the way she stood there, calm, unmoved, untouched by the weight of eyes on her, that shifted the atmosphere without anyone quite realizing why. Hale noticed it too, though he didn't show it. He checked his watch, then nodded toward the timer. "Whenever you're ready," he said, tone flat, confident, certain of how this would end. Evelyn didn't look back. She didn't acknowledge the challenge. Her focus never left the distance ahead. For a brief moment, the entire range held its breath, balanced on the edge of something no one could name yet. Then her fingers settled, the world narrowing to a single point, and everything else disappeared. The shot broke the silence like a clean breath, not loud, not dramatic, just precise, and before anyone could react, the second followed, then the third, each one spaced perfectly as if time itself had slowed to match her rhythm. No rush, no correction. The rifle barely moved against her shoulder. Downrange, the steel targets responded in quiet sequence, subtle vibrations echoing back across the open field. The technician inside the booth leaned closer to the monitor, his fingers hovering above the keyboard, unsure whether to interrupt or just watch. Numbers began to populate the screen faster than expected, calculations adjusting in real time, wind compensation, distance factors, trajectory curves, all aligning too cleanly to make sense. "That is not possible," he whispered, but no one answered. Out on the line, a few soldiers shifted. Their weight, confusion replacing the earlier amusement. One of them glanced at the wind flag again, then back at Evelyn, as if trying to catch her making a mistake. She did not. Her breathing remained steady, almost invisible, her movements minimal, every action flowing into the next without hesitation. General Hale's expression did not change at first, but his arms slowly uncrossed, his posture tightening by instinct rather than choice. He had seen skilled shooters before. He had trained some of the best. This did not look like skill alone. This looked like memory, like repetition carved too deep to be forgotten. The fourth shot landed before the previous echo had fully faded. Then the fifth, each one faster now, but not rushed, just efficient, as if she was no longer thinking about the process at all. The range felt smaller somehow, compressed into the narrow space between her and the target, everything else fading into the background. Inside the booth, the screen flickered again. A hidden line of archived data surfaced briefly, tagged with an old classification code that had not been accessed in years. The technician froze, eyes scanning the text before it vanished again. He swallowed, then looked toward Hale, uncertain whether to speak. Out on the field, a senior instructor stepped forward slightly, his gaze narrowing. There was something familiar in the pattern, something he had seen long ago but could not immediately place. Where did she learn that sequence? He murmured, more to himself than anyone else. The final shot came without warning. No build-up, no hesitation, just a quiet release, followed by stillness. Evelyn lowered the rifle slowly, her expression unchanged, as if the entire sequence had been nothing more than routine. No glance at the scoreboard, no search for approval, just silence. For a moment, nothing happened. Then the system completed its calculation. The numbers locked into place. A soft tone echoed from the control booth, signaling the end of the run. The technician stared at the result, his face draining of color. He checked it again, manually this time, running the numbers twice, then a third time, as if repetition might change the outcome. It did not. Outside, the soldiers were already looking toward the screen, waiting for confirmation of what they felt, but could not yet explain. General Hale took a single step forward, his eyes fixed ahead, not on her, not yet, but on the unseen line where his record had stood untouched for 20 years. The air felt heavier now, charged with something that no one had expected when she first stepped onto the range. And somewhere in that silence, the certainty he had carried for decades began to shift. The silence did not break all at once, it fractured slowly, like something fragile giving way under pressure, as the screen finally turned toward the range and revealed the result. No dramatic sound, no flashing lights, just numbers. Clean, undeniable, final. The record that had stood for 20 years did not just fall, it disappeared, replaced by a margin so wide it felt almost disrespectful to the man who had set it. No one spoke. A soldier near the back exhaled under his breath, as if he had been holding it the entire time. Another lowered his rifle without realizing it, eyes still locked on the scoreboard. Inside the booth, the technician stepped back from the monitor, shaking his head slightly, not in disbelief anymore, but in quiet acceptance. He had checked it too many times to argue with it. Out on the line, General Hale stood still, his gaze fixed ahead, but not on the numbers anymore. His focus had shifted. Slowly, deliberately, he turned toward Evelyn. She was already setting the rifle down, movements calm, controlled, almost indifferent to what had just happened. There was no celebration in her posture, no sign that she had just done something no one else could. She adjusted the strap on her shoulder, brushed a faint layer of dust from her sleeve, then stepped back from the firing line as if her part was already finished. That was the moment it changed. Not the score, not the record, the way she walked away from it. A senior instructor moved closer to Hale, voice low, careful. "Sir, that pattern," he said, hesitating for a second, searching for the right words. "It is not standard training. That is legacy sequencing." Hale did not respond. His eyes remained on Evelyn, tracking every step she took across the gravel. Another voice joined, older this time, steadier but carrying weight. "I have seen that before," the veteran said quietly. "Not here. Not in any program we run now." He paused, then added, "That came from outside the system." The words hung in the air, heavier than the silence before. Inside the booth, the technician finally spoke, unable to hold it back any longer. "Sir, the system flagged her call sign," he said, louder than he intended. All eyes shifted toward him. He swallowed, then continued. "It tried to pull archived data. Old classification. It was blocked, but it recognized her." A ripple moved through the group, subtle but undeniable. Recognition meant history. History meant something had been erased. Hale's jaw tightened slightly, not in anger, but in realization. He had spent decades building standards, teaching others to follow them. believing he understood the limits of what was possible on this range. Yet standing a few yards away was someone who had just rewritten those limits without effort, without explanation. Evelyn stopped near the edge of the field, just short of the exit gate. She did not rush. She did not look back. The wind shifted again, brushing past her, catching the edge of that faded patch on her shoulder. For a brief second, it lifted just enough for the symbol beneath to become visible. The veteran saw it first. His breath caught, not sharply, but enough to make him step forward without thinking. "That is not a call sign," he said, voice barely above a whisper. Hale heard him. Everyone did. The veteran's eyes stayed locked on the mark, his expression no longer confused, no longer searching. It had changed into something else. Recognition. Respect. A memory surfacing after years of being buried. He spoke again, quieter this time, but with certainty. "That is a designation." Hale took one step forward, then another, the distance between them closing slowly. The confidence he had carried earlier was still there, but it had shifted shape. Less certainty, more curiosity, more caution. Evelyn finally paused, sensing the movement behind her. For a moment, she stood there, the same calm presence she had been from the start, untouched by the tension building around her. Then, without turning fully, she spoke, her voice steady, almost gentle. "Records are not meant to last forever," she said. The words landed differently now, not as a challenge, not as defiance, just a statement. Hale stopped a few feet behind her. The range, the soldiers, the noise of boots and equipment, all of it faded into the background. In that quiet space, something unspoken passed between them. Not rivalry, not pride, understanding. And for the first time in a long while, General Marcus Hale did not have the final word. The wind eased for a moment, leaving the range suspended in a strange, weightless quiet, as if the air itself was waiting for something to be said. But Evelyn did not turn around, and General Hale did not rush to fill the silence. He studied her instead, not the way he had before, not with dismissal or quiet amusement, but with the focus of someone trying to understand a piece that did not fit into any system he knew. Designation. He repeated under his breath, the words settling differently now, carrying weight he had not recognized before. The veteran stepped closer, eyes still fixed on the faint mark at her shoulder, his voice low but steady. "That symbol was retired," he said. "Or at least, that is what we were told." A few nearby soldiers exchanged glances, the shift in tone unmistakable. This was no longer about a broken record. Something deeper had surfaced, something older than the range, older than the standards Hale had spent years building. Evelyn exhaled slowly, almost imperceptibly, then adjusted the strap across her shoulder as if preparing to leave without another word. Hale noticed the movement and spoke before she could take another step. "You knew the conditions," he said, his voice controlled but no longer sharp. "The wind, the timing, the sequence. You did not adapt to the range. You already knew it." It was not an accusation. It was a realization. Evelyn paused, her gaze drifting briefly across the horizon, past the targets, as if measuring distance in a way no one else could see. "Ranges change," she said quietly. "Principles do not." The answer did not explain anything, yet it explained enough. The instructor who had spoken earlier let out a slow breath, his expression tightening as memory began to take shape. "Legacy sequencing," he said again, more certain this time. "That was not taught here. That came from the old field manuals, the ones we do not use anymore." The technician inside the booth stepped out now, holding a tablet in his hand, hesitation written across his face. "Sir," he said, addressing Hale but glancing at Evelyn. "The system tried to pull a file linked to that designation. It is restricted beyond my clearance. It does not even show a title, just a code string." He turned the screen slightly, enough for Hale to see the faint line of text, fragmented, incomplete, but unmistakably real. Hale stared at it for a moment, then looked back at Evelyn, the pieces beginning to connect in ways he had not expected. "You set the standard," he said slowly, not as a question, but as something he was forcing himself to accept. Evelyn did not answer right away. The wind picked up again, brushing across the range, carrying a faint metallic scent from the targets downfield. When she finally spoke, her voice was calm, almost distant. "Standards are not set," she said. "They are tested, over and over, until they either hold or they break." No one moved. No one interrupted. The words settled into the space between them, heavier than any score that had appeared on the board. Hale took another step forward, closing the distance. But this time there was no trace of challenge in his posture. Only respect, forming slowly, deliberately. Then why walk away, he asked, quieter now, after proving it still holds. Evelyn's hand rested briefly at her side, fingers brushing against the edge of that worn patch. For a second, something flickered across her expression, not pride, not regret, but something more restrained, more controlled. Because it was never about the record, she said. She turned her head just enough to meet his gaze, her eyes steady, clear, carrying a depth that did not come from this place. It was about who still remembers how to reach it. The range remained. Silent, but it was a different silence now. Not confusion, not disbelief, understanding. And as Hale stood there, watching her, he realized that what had just happened was not the breaking of a record. It was the return of something that had never truly been gone. No one spoke for several seconds after her words settled, not because there was nothing to say, but because anything spoken too quickly would have sounded smaller than the moment deserved. The range no longer felt like a place for training. It felt like something had been uncovered, something that had been buried beneath years of routine, quietly waiting for the right person to step back onto the line. General Hale let out a slow breath, his shoulders lowering just slightly, the rigid certainty he carried earlier replaced by something more measured. "Who taught you?" he asked, though the question already felt incomplete the moment it left his mouth. Evelyn's expression did not change. She shifted her weight subtly, the kind of movement that came from long habit rather than conscious thought. "The same place that taught you," she replied, her voice even. But there was a quiet difference now, something deeper beneath the surface. Hale frowned slightly, not in disagreement, but in recognition that the answer carried more than it revealed. The veteran beside him stepped forward again, his eyes narrowing as memory sharpened into clarity. "No," he said quietly. "Not the same place." He paused, then added, "Not the same level." That word lingered. Level. It changed everything. Around them, the soldiers who had once whispered jokes now stood still, their attention fixed on Evelyn in a way that had nothing to do with curiosity anymore. It was respect forming in real time, replacing every assumption they had made minutes earlier. Inside the control booth, the technician tapped his screen again, slower this time, careful, as if he was aware he was brushing against something he should not disturb. "There is more here," he said, voice low but steady. The system did not just recognize her. It tried to prioritize her. Hale turned his head slightly. "Prioritize," he repeated. The technician nodded, as if her presence overrides standard protocols. A quiet ripple moved through the group. That was not something the system did lightly. Hale looked back at Evelyn, studying her again, but now with a different lens. Not as someone who had broken a record, but as someone who had existed outside the limits he understood. "You said it was about who remembers," he said. "So tell me this, how many still do?" Evelyn did not answer immediately. Her gaze moved across the range once more, taking in the targets, the markers, the distance, as if she was measuring more than space. "Fewer than before," she said at last. "Enough to matter." The simplicity of it carried weight. The instructor who had recognized the sequence lowered his head slightly, a quiet acknowledgement passing through him. He had trained for years, taught dozens, maybe hundreds, yet in this moment, he felt like a student again. Hale noticed it. He noticed all of it. The shift in posture, the silence, the way no one questioned her presence anymore. Authority had changed hands without a single order being given. He stepped closer, stopping just short of her, not to confront, not to challenge, but to understand. "You walked in here like it was familiar," he said. "Like none of this was new." Evelyn finally turned fully toward him. For the first time, her eyes met his without distance, without deflection. "Because it is not," she said. "No arrogance. No pride. Just truth." Hale held her gaze for a moment, then nodded once, slowly. It was not agreement. It was acceptance. Behind them, the range remained still, but something had shifted permanently. Not the equipment, not the layout. The people, the way they stood, the way they looked at her, the way they looked at each other. And as Evelyn adjusted her jacket, preparing to leave without ceremony, one thing became clear to everyone watching. She had not come to prove anything. She had come to remind them what had been forgotten. The gravel shifted softly under her boots as Evelyn took another step toward the exit, unhurried, as if nothing behind her required a second glance. But the weight of the moment followed her anyway, carried in the silence of every person still. Standing on that range, General Hale did not move at first. He watched her with a focus that had changed completely, no longer measuring, no longer judging, but studying something he had not encountered in years. "Evelyn," he called out, not loudly, but enough to stop her before she reached the gate. The name felt different now, no longer attached to a stranger, but to something with history. She paused again, her hand resting lightly against the cold metal frame of the exit, then turned just enough to listen. Hale stepped forward, closing the distance with deliberate calm. "If what you said is true," he began, choosing his words carefully, "then this place is not what it used to be." It was not a complaint. It was an admission. Evelyn's gaze softened slightly, not in sympathy, but in understanding. "Nothing ever is," she said. "That does not mean it cannot be again." The simplicity of her answer settled deeper than any explanation could. Behind Hale, the instructor who had recognized the sequence took a slow step forward, his voice quieter now, stripped of the certainty he once carried. "We teach what we were taught," he said. But somewhere along the way, something got simplified. He did not need to say more. Everyone felt it. The drills had become cleaner, faster, easier to measure, easier to replicate. But something essential had been lost in that process. Hale nodded once, his jaw tightening slightly as the realization fully set in. He had not just maintained the system. He had allowed it to narrow. Evelyn studied him for a brief moment, then shifted her weight again, preparing to leave for real this time. "Standards do not disappear," she said quietly. "People just stop reaching for them." The words did not accuse. They reminded. The technician near the booth lowered his tablet slowly, his earlier tension replaced by something closer to awe. One of the younger soldiers stepped forward, hesitating, then stopped himself, unsure if he had the right to speak. The veteran placed a hand lightly on his shoulder, a silent signal to hold back, to observe, to learn. Hale exhaled slowly, then did something no one expected. He removed his gloves, one finger at a time, and let them rest in his hand. It was a small gesture, but on that range, it carried meaning. He stepped closer, stopping just a few feet from Evelyn, not as a superior, not as a challenger, but as someone standing on equal ground for the first time in a long while. "Then show us," he said, his voice steady, stripped of ego. Not the record, not the result, the standard. The request hung in the air, simple but heavy. Evelyn looked at him, really looked this time, measuring not his rank, not his authority, but his intent. The wind moved again, lifting the edge of her jacket, revealing that worn patch for just a second before it settled back into place. "You already saw it," she replied. Hale shook his head slightly. "We saw the outcome," he said. "That is not the same thing." A faint pause followed. Then, for the first time, a subtle shift appeared in Evelyn's expression, not quite a smile, but something close to it, something that suggested approval without needing to say it. She glanced back toward the range, toward the targets that now felt different than they had minutes ago. "Then you will have to unlearn a few things first," she said. No one spoke. No one moved. The weight of that sentence settled across every person standing there. Not a command, not an order, a condition. And as the silence stretched once more, it became clear that what she offered was not a demonstration. It was a path back to something they had let slip away. No one argued with her. That was the first sign things had truly changed. Soldiers who had spent years trusting their routines now stood quietly, as if waiting for permission to think differently. General Hale held her gaze for a moment longer, then gave a single, slow nod, not as a command, but as acceptance of something unfamiliar. "Then we start there," he said, his voice steady but stripped of the certainty that once defined it. Evelyn did not respond immediately. Instead, she turned away from the gate and walked back toward the range, each step calm, deliberate, drawing every eye with her without effort. Gravel shifted underfoot. A light breeze moved across the field, carrying the faint metallic scent of steel and distance. She stopped at the firing line again, but this time she did not reach for a weapon. Instead, she looked down at the ground, at the placement markers, at the subtle unevenness in the terrain that most had stopped noticing long ago. First thing, she said quietly, not raising her voice, yet every person heard it. You are all standing wrong. A ripple of confusion moved through the group. The instructor frowned slightly, glancing at his own stance, then at the others. We follow standard alignment, he said, almost defensively. Evelyn shook her head once, not dismissive, just certain. Standard is built for consistency, she replied, not for precision. She stepped forward, adjusting the position of a nearby soldier by just a few inches, shifting his weight, aligning his shoulders in a way that felt unfamiliar even to him. Feel that, she said. The soldier hesitated, then nodded slowly, surprised. It is different, he admitted. It is stable, she corrected. Different comes later. Hale watched closely, his attention sharper than it had been all day. This was not about shooting anymore. It was about foundation, about things so basic they had been overlooked. Evelyn moved down the line, making small adjustments, each one subtle, each one precise. She did not rush. She did not explain everything. She let them feel it first. The shift in balance, the change in tension, the way their bodies responded when they stopped forcing control and started working with it. You were taught to control the outcome, she said as she moved. That is why you miss what comes before it. The instructor lowered his head slightly, recognizing the truth in that more than he expected. Years of training had focused on results, on measurable success, on numbers that could be tracked and improved. But this was something else. Something quieter. Something deeper. Evelyn stopped at the center of the line, turning back to face them all. You chase the shot, she continued. You anticipate it. You prepare for it like it is something separate from you. She paused, letting the words settle. It is not. The wind picked up again, brushing across the range, lifting dust and soft patterns that moved unpredictably across the ground. Evelyn watched it for a moment, then gestured toward it. You do not fight that, she said. You read it. You move with it. Same way you move with yourself. One of the younger soldiers shifted slightly, trying to adjust instinctively, but stopped when she raised a hand just slightly. Do not rush, she said. You have spent years learning it one way. It will not change in 5 minutes. Hale stepped forward, just enough to stand among them now, no longer apart, no longer observing from a distance. Then how long? He asked, not as a challenge, but as a genuine question. Evelyn looked at him, her expression steady, grounded. Long enough to forget what you think you know, she said. The answer was simple, but it carried weight that no timeline could measure. The range fell quiet again, but it was not the same silence as before. This one held intention, focus, a willingness to step into something unfamiliar. And as Evelyn turned slightly, guiding them back to their positions, it became clear that what she was rebuilding was not just skill. It was the mindset that had once made that skill possible in the first place. The range felt different now, not quieter, but more focused, as if every small movement carried weight it did not have before. No one rushed to prove anything. No one tried to replicate what they had just witnessed. Instead, they stood there, adjusting, recalibrating, learning how to stand again before even thinking about the shot. Evelyn moved slowly along the line, not correcting everything, not overwhelming them, just guiding one detail at a time. A shoulder lowered here. A foot shifted there. A breath held a fraction longer than before. Each adjustment seemed small, almost insignificant on its own, yet together they began to reshape something deeper. General Hale mirrored the process without realizing it. His stance changed subtly, the rigid structure he had carried for years softening just enough to allow something new to take hold. He did not speak. He did not interrupt. For once, he let someone else set the pace. Do not look at the target yet, Evelyn said quietly. A few soldiers hesitated, confused by the instruction, but followed it anyway. Their eyes dropped slightly, focusing inward instead of outward. You are too far ahead, she continued. You keep trying to reach the result before you even understand where you are. The instructor who had once led every drill took a slow breath, closing his eyes for a moment, feeling the shift rather than analyzing it. It was uncomfortable. It was unfamiliar, but it made sense in a way he could not explain. The wind brushed across the range again, stronger this time, moving through the line in uneven patterns. Instead of resisting it, the group remained still, letting it pass, noticing how it affected their balance, their posture, their breathing. Evelyn watched closely, saying nothing for a moment, allowing them to experience it without guidance. Then she spoke again. "That is where it starts," she said. "Not with control, with awareness." One of the younger soldiers opened his eyes slowly, his expression no longer uncertain, but focused in a new way. "It feels slower," he said. Evelyn nodded slightly. "It is not slower," she replied. "You are just finally noticing it." The distinction settled over them. Time had not changed. Their attention had. Hale shifted his weight again, testing the new alignment, feeling the difference in a way that surprised him. For years, he had trusted precision built on repetition. Now he was standing in something that felt less rigid, yet more stable. It challenged everything he had believed about mastery. "We built systems to make this easier to teach," he said, almost to himself. Evelyn glanced toward him briefly. "You made it easier to repeat," she said. "Not easier to understand." The words landed without resistance. No one argued. No one tried to defend the old way. The proof was still hanging on the board behind them, silent and undeniable. Evelyn stepped back slightly, giving them space now, allowing the adjustments to settle. "Now," she said, her voice steady, "look at the target." They lifted their eyes together, but this time it was different. There was no rush to align, no urgency to fire. The distance felt clearer. The variables felt sharper. Even the air seemed more defined. The target was no longer something to conquer. It was something to connect with. Hale noticed it first. The shift in perspective. The absence of pressure. For the first time in years, the range did not feel like a test. It felt like a conversation. Evelyn watched them for a moment longer, then gave a small nod, almost imperceptible. "When you are ready," she said. No countdown. No command. Just trust. The line remained still for a few seconds, each person settling into the new rhythm, letting the moment build naturally. And in that quiet, something clicked. Not in the weapon, not in the system, in them. A return to something they had lost without realizing it. Something that had always been there, waiting beneath the noise, beneath the repetition, beneath the need to prove. And as the first movement began again, it was no longer about breaking a record. It was about understanding why that record had ever mattered in the first place. The first shot did not come from the most experienced soldier, nor from the one who had trained the longest. It came from the quietest one in the line, the one who had stopped trying to prove anything minutes ago. The sound was clean, controlled, but more importantly, it felt different. Not forced, not rushed. Others followed, not in competition, not in urgency, but in rhythm. Each movement carried intention. Each breath held meaning. The range no longer echoed with scattered attempts. It moved like a single, steady pulse. Evelyn watched without stepping in, her presence no longer guiding every detail, but anchoring the space around them. She did not need to correct anything now. They were correcting themselves. General Hale lifted his rifle again, slower this time, aware of every inch of movement, every shift in weight. For years, he had relied on instinct shaped by repetition. Now he let that instinct settle, stripped down to something simpler, something quieter. He did not rush the shot. He let it arrive. When it did, it felt different. Not better, not worse, just true. He lowered the rifle slightly, not looking at the result, not needing to. For the first time in a long time, the outcome was not the focus. The process was. Around him, the same change unfolded. Soldiers who had once measured success in numbers now stood still after each shot, not checking the board, but checking themselves. Small adjustments, subtle awareness, a return to something they had not realized they lost. The instructor who once led every command stepped back entirely, watching his team move without direction, without pressure. He nodded once, quietly, understanding that leadership had shifted into something less visible, but more powerful. Evelyn turned slightly, her gaze moving across the line, taking in the change, the difference, the subtle return of something that had been buried under years of routine. She did not smile. She did not praise. She simply observed. That was enough. The wind moved again, softer now, almost steady, as if the range itself had settled into the same rhythm. General Hale lowered his rifle fully this time and stepped forward, closing the distance between them once more. There was no hesitation in his movement now, no trace of the earlier doubt. He stopped in front of her, his posture straight, not rigid, but grounded. For a brief moment, neither of them spoke. Then, Without ceremony, without announcement, Hale raised his hand in a precise, deliberate salute. It was not for the record, not for the demonstration. It was for what she had brought back. Evelyn held his gaze for a second, then gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. No return salute. No need. The respect was already there. Behind them, the range continued, quieter, steadier, stronger. The board still displayed the broken record, but no one looked at it anymore. It no longer mattered the way it once did. What mattered was what had replaced it. Not a number, not a name, a standard remembered. Evelyn turned toward the gate again, this time without pause. Her steps were the same as when she arrived. Calm, unnoticed at first, but no one missed them now. As she reached the edge of the field, one of the younger soldiers spoke, not loudly, just enough to carry. "Ma'am, will you be back?" Evelyn did not stop. She did not turn. Her voice came quietly, carried by the wind. "That depends," she said. A brief pause followed, just long enough to settle the weight of what came next. "On whether you forget again." The gate closed behind her with a soft metallic sound. The range remained still for a moment, then slowly came back to life. Not as it was before. Something had changed. Something had returned. And this time, they understood what it meant to keep it.